Hello and welcome to the Tough Girl podcast, which is all about motivating and inspiring you. I'm your host, Sarah Williams. The Tough Girl podcast is sponsorship and ad-free thanks to the monthly financial support of patrons. To find out more about supporting your favourite podcast and becoming a patron, please check out Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl podcast, and help me to increase the amount of female role models in the media. All patrons will get their name on a dedicated patrons page on the Tough Girl website. All female patrons $5 and above are invited to join the closed Facebook group, the Tough Girl Tribe. Today I'm delighted we're going to be speaking to Tiffany Coates, the world's foremost female motorcycle adventurer. Tiffany has explored 6 continents by motorcycle, riding many hundreds of thousands of miles through countless countries during more than 20 years of adventurous journeys. Tiffany's travels continues both solo and through her work as a motorcycle tour guide, and her talks and presentations are always in demand at adventure travel events around the world. Enjoy.
Yes, I'm a motorcyclist, and maybe a bit of a one with a difference. I've been around the world several times solo on my motorbike. I work as a freelance motorcycle tour guide, specialising in Asia, Africa and Latin America. And I do blogs and my website, Tiffany's Travels. I travel everywhere by motorcycle, and I think it's the best way to see the world.
Where did your love of motorcycles come from?
I have to admit, I'm one of those where it's a love for travel and a desire to see the world that led it. So I'd always done a lot of backpacking in the past and been around the world and worked and stuff like that. And then I went round to my friends one day, and I said to her, it's my best friend Becky, I said, I fancy going to India. And she said, I would quite like to go to India as well. Okay, let's go together. And I said I would like to go over land to get there. There's lots of interesting countries to see along the way. And before we know it, we said, well, let's go by motorbike. And it was like, yeah, we'll go by motorbike. Now, we didn't have bikes. We didn't have licenses. We had no idea how to ride. And in fact, Becky had never even sat on a motorbike in her life. Whereas I'd gone out with a guy who had one, and I'd been on the back a few times. And so I was very much sort of, it's fantastic, it's great fun. And on the strength of that, we took up the challenge and rode to India. The first step was obviously learning how to ride. We did 5-day intensive training on 125s. By day 3, we thought we were Evel Knievels. We were revving up at the traffic lights, giving each other a thumbs up and saying, next stop, India. And then we got told off a lot by our instructor for messing around. But at the end of the 5 days, we both passed and we got our licenses. So then, armed with motorbike licenses, we started going around saying to people, okay, we've got bike licenses. We're going to buy a motorbike and we're going to go to India on it. Now, they did think we were mad because we had no other experience. And one other thing was that we decided we would just take one bike between us because we didn't have much money. So we were on quite a tight budget. And also, if you're both on the same bike, things are simpler. You can't lose each other. And anyway, we were sort of both the same level experience. So we didn't mind sharing the riding and sharing being on the back. So there wasn't that sort of power struggle where someone on the back is thinking, oh my God, I could do this a lot better. We were just both equally ignorant, I think I have to say, really. A lot of people have said it was blind ignorance that saw us achieve it. So we got very excited about it when we were telling people of our plan. And so we said, well, what bike should we take? And this was at the end of the 90s. There weren't so many bikes around that there are these days. So we looked around and people said, well, there's the Africa Twin, but that's quite tall. And neither of us are very tall, I have to admit. And there was also the BMW, the R80 or R100 GS. So we said, great, that sounds like it'll be perfect. We were told it's a bit big and heavy, but to carry 2 people and all their camping gear across all the varying terrain over the many thousands of miles to India, it will be perfect. So we started looking around, and a mechanic friend helped us, and he phoned us up one day and said, yes, I know someone selling one. Come and have a look and buy it. So we went to have a look, and he had already checked it out. The engine was good. And we looked at it, we thought, oh, crikey, we didn't realise they were that big. our only experience was on 125s, and this is suddenly an 800cc bike that weighs a quarter of a tonne. I remember we looked at each other and just went, oh, that is rather large. Anyway, we bought the bike. We realised we weren't up to the riding standard required to get it back to where we were staying. So our mechanic friend Martin rode the bike back for us, and then he kept it in his workshop. And every day after work, we used to cycle down to his workshop, and we'd get the bike, and we'd nicknamed her by now. We called the bike Thelma. We'd already decided in advance that we wanted an all-female team for this challenge, so the bike had to have a female name. And we didn't want a name that was too racy, just something quite old-fashioned maybe. So Thelma was decided upon. It's also from the film Thelma and Louise. That's a road movie about two women. Doesn't end very well, but there's not that many road movies that feature women. So Thelma it was. Anyway, every day after work, we would push Thelma down the street to an office car park at the end of the road. And we practiced on that office car park, going round and round till we worked out how to keep the bike upright. And at this point, we were still just riding solo. And then we were let out onto the streets with Martin following, with one of us behind him on his bike. And we would learn from each other's mistakes. We'd watch the other one riding. And this was central London. And I really believe if you can learn to ride a big bike in central London, you can ride anywhere in the world. The congestion, the aggression from the other drivers. And these are tiny roads, they're narrow roads. They're not made for all this traffic. And very quickly we learned that you need to be an assertive rider because you need to take ownership of your lane or space in the road. Don't let white van man push you aside. You also need to have a sense of defensive riding, looking ahead all the time and anticipating when cars and trucks will just pull out in front of us and be ready to take evasive action, just pulling on the brakes, whatever. And it's the spatial awareness, I think, that was probably one of the biggest factors that helped us in the future rides. Because when you're riding in London, you're packed in by traffic on all sides, and the motorbikes filter between the lanes of traffic. And it's also called lane splitting in North America. In Europe, everyone filters. That's why you ride a motorbike. It's so that you can get to the front of the congested traffic. So we would be filtering through. And I can remember at one particular point, I'd been trying to tentatively filter, and I'd come to a halt because there was a big lorry on one side of me. And on the other side, a double-decker bus came out of the bus stop. And suddenly I realized, gosh, I'm sandwiched between these two with just a couple of inches on each side between myself and these large vehicles. And I just thought, right, well, I'll just wait. And then from behind me, I heard, "Oi, get a move on." And it was the motorbike couriers behind me, all sort of furiously sort of waving and telling me to go on ahead. And I took a deep breath. I revved up, eased out the clutch and rode in a dead straight line perfectly between this line of vehicles. The sense of achievement was great. And I think for me, that was a real turning point. It was like, yeah, I can ride this bike. I can do this. By this point, Becky was at a similar level. And so within 2 months of getting the bike, we set off. We're 2 up. We've got all the luggage, the camping gear, the cooking gear, but also things like spare parts, the Haynes repair manual, extra tools, all the bits and bobs that you would need for maintaining a vehicle, and also a first aid kit, maps, lots of different things, all somehow packed away into the panniers on the motorbike. We set off and crossed Europe first of all. We kept a journal, and every day we would record what we'd done, how far we'd been, that type of thing, and the people we'd met. We met some amazing characters on the way. Something else we also recorded was the number of times we dropped the bike. So, for example, oh yes, we were still dropping the bike. Day 2, we've reached Germany and we've only dropped the bike 3 times. Now, this is no mean feat because, like I say, it's a quarter-tonne bike. We've got all our luggage on it, plus our combined weight. And it was never when we were going fast. We only drop the bike when we're slowing down or stopping, for example, traffic lights or a roundabout. So we'd pull up to a roundabout and whoever's on the front, she would be putting her left foot down to reach the ground. But if there was a bit of gravel or uneven ground, just as your tiptoes reach the ground, and bearing in mind we're only on tiptoe to reach the ground in the first place, as the tiptoes go down onto the ground, they might slip, and then the bike would just tilt slightly. And then that was it. The bike would just be falling over, but in slow motion. And we'd be squawking through the intercom, and the one on the back through her headphones would just hear, left foot down, left foot down. And she'd be desperately trying to get her foot down to the ground to try and help hold the bike up. However, we never succeeded in holding it up. It would always just gently topple over onto its side. We'd just do deep breath, 1, 2, 3, heave it up, get back on, carry on riding. And then leaving the traffic there, looking at each other saying, did that motorbike just fall over? Lots of fun, adventures and laughs on our way across Europe. We wild camped a lot. Like I said before, we don't have a lot of money, so wild camping is a very cheap way to travel. And with a motorbike, you can go just about anywhere, like going through mountain ranges and thinking, this is just beautiful, and following a footpath, camping out beside streams, in meadows, just wherever we thought looked nice. We did go into towns for fuel and food and that kind of thing, and we zigzagged our way across Europe. We reached Turkey and the gateway to Asia. We crossed Turkey just as it started snowing in the east, which was a bit of a shock for us because we'd been expecting hot weather all the way. And then we crossed Iran, and that was probably one of our first big challenges, because in Iran we had to wear the chador, which was also known as a burqa. That's the black robe that completely covers what we're wearing. And we had ours needed to go over our bike gear, and our heads had to be totally covered. We couldn't show any hair. We couldn't show our necks either. So we'd put on these black robes with our bike gear and then the helmets on top. And then we'd get on our motorbike, and the roads in Iran mostly are pretty good. There's some great tarmac. You can go at quite a good speed, and it's a big country. So we'd be whizzing along, and we later heard from other travellers that we had somehow picked up the nickname of nuns on the run, because we've got these black robes billowing along behind us as we're riding along through the deserts. Iran we also found to be extremely friendly and hospitable. We were invited to people's houses. We learned how to eat with our hands. We experienced so many different cultures on this whole trip, but I do think the hospitality of Iran particularly stood out for us. From Iran, we crossed into Pakistan, which we had an amazing time there. Now, originally when we were looking at our routes, and there's not a lot of choice for going to India, and we looked at Pakistan and we thought, oh, well, we'll probably just cross there in about a week. When we crossed over the border into Pakistan, and we were told we had to travel in convoy, and we looked around and there was one Land Rover. So it was just us and the Land Rover that made our way. We're not sure that constituted a convoy. And we were travelling through Pakistan, and we very quickly realised this is an incredible country. We've got mountains, we've got great people again, an interesting culture, and just that freedom to go everywhere. And by this point, our riding skills had improved, so we were actually starting to off-road a bit more, following dried up riverbeds, still quite often falling off with the off-roading, but enjoying it, having a fun and just laughing at ourselves, wild camping everywhere still. So we ended up spending a whole month in Pakistan, as long as our visas would allow us. And then we headed further east, and we reached the border with India, and the historic moment when, yes, we crossed into Amritsar in India, and we'd made it. We'd completed our journey from England all the way to India. We travelled around India for a while, enjoying seeing all the different sights, trying the food, deserts, mountains again. And then we were looking at each other one day, and we just said, this has been the biggest adventure I can imagine. I've had so much fun, and we were both agreeing with each other about this. And we said, well, we don't really want this to end, and we've still got some money left, so why don't we carry on? Let's see if we can get to Australia. And before we knew it, we'd got to the east coast of India. We were not allowed through Myanmar. That was closed to foreign vehicles. So we found a shipping agent in Chennai on the east coast, and we arranged a ship to send Thelma past Myanmar to Thailand. We flew over, picked up Thelma from the docks, and then we rode down through Southeast Asia, through Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore. Indonesia wouldn't let us in either because they weren't allowing foreign vehicles. So then we found another shipping agent and we sent Thelma on a ship from Singapore down to Perth in Western Australia. And then we rode the whole length of Australia from west to east, starting in Perth and making our way across to Sydney. By this point, we didn't have much money. We had to wild camp every night. But again, it was the most incredible experience, even on the Nullarbor, the longest straight road in the world, where there's not much to see, but just the experience of being out in the open, smelling the eucalyptus, watching kangaroos bouncing along, and also the road trains. These are massive trucks that have 3 or sometimes 4 trailers, and they're quite a peril on the roads of Australia, and particularly for a motorcyclist because you can get caught in the slipstream from it. So we learnt to be very wary. A motorcyclist on our first day in Australia had warned us about them and what's the best way to overtake. So we quickly learnt how to drop the revs and then rev up a bit faster as we're going past in case we get caught by a side wind just after we've gone past them. And so we made our way across Australia in its barren landscape and we reached Sydney. By this point, that was just about zero for our bank balances, but luckily we've got good friends there. So in Sydney, we started couch surfing with friends. We both got jobs and we rented a room in a house and then settled down for a bit. We had 2, sometimes 3 jobs each, desperately aware that we were a long way from home. We're responsible for a motorbike and we've got no money. So every penny was saved. And after a while, we had enough money saved up that we could think about getting home. So we started looking into shipping Thelma home again. But when you're in Australia and you look at a map of the world, and there in the bottom right corner is Australia, and there up near the central part, near the top, is the UK. But just below the UK and to the left of Australia is Africa. And I remember we just looked at each other and said, wow, look, Africa's on the way home. It feels like cheating to just ship Thelma home. Let's ride. Thus began the next stage of this big journey that just didn't seem to be stopping. We started looking into shipping Thelma from Sydney straight across the Indian Ocean to Cape Town. However, at this point, Becky met the man of her dreams and decided she wanted to settle down. So she wasn't going to come through Africa. It wasn't an easy decision for her. Obviously, I had to accept it, and as long as she was happy. So I carried on with the plans. By this point, I'd worked out how to pick up Thelma on my own. So I did think, well, I could do this on my own because I always feel that's the bottom line. You've got to be able to pick up the bike if you drop it. If there's 2 of you, you can pick it up between the pair of you. But if you're on your own, you must be able to pick it up on your own. So I'd worked out how to do that on my own due to a couple of close calls in Australia. But I just then had this thought, I think it's going to be a lot more fun if there's someone else with me. Sure, I could do this alone, but if I've got someone else to share the experiences with, and it's the beautiful sunsets, the sunrises, the great views, the fantastic people, it's better to share it with someone else. So I got in touch with my friend Maggie Dunleavy, who's from Galway in Ireland. She's got a bike licence but has no big bike experience. And I just very cheerfully said to her, don't worry, Maggie, that's not a problem. Get yourself to Cape Town on a one-way ticket. That's all you need. I've got Becky's helmet and jacket and space on the bike, and we'll cross Africa together. So sure enough, a month later, Thelma was shipped over to Cape Town. I flew on over, and then Maggie came and joined me. I showed her how to ride Thelma, and then we set off, and we made our way up through Africa, from South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Malawi, Tanzania, Zanzibar, Kenya, Sudan. We had an amazing time, but I have to say Africa is the toughest continent. The lack of infrastructure, the desperate poverty we encountered, the mud, the dirt, the gravel, and then rivers to ride through. Yeah. There were no bridges in places. We had to ride through these rivers, some of which came up to the petrol tank on the bike. Anyway, we succeeded. We made our way up through Africa and even crossed the mighty Sahara Desert. Reaching Egypt, we started looking around and realised, it's now winter time and it's going to be very cold to ride over land because it would have meant going up through the Middle East and back through Turkey. So from Egypt, we rode across the Sinai Desert to Israel. And then took a ferry from Israel to Greece, rode across Greece, and took another ferry on the other side to Venice in Italy, and then rode northern Italy and all the way up through France, having crossed the Alps in a snowstorm, and finally made it home. And my mum, who is a very laid-back woman, she and my dad have brought up 5 children to be very independent. My mum greeted me with the words, Tiffany, there you are. Now, you went off on that motorbike. Now, bearing in mind, nobody in my family rides motorbikes. It doesn't worry them that I ride one. They just think it's a bit odd. So she said, yes, there you are. You went off on that motorbike and you said you were only going to India and you'd be about 8 or 9 months. You've been gone for 2.5 years. Where the hell have you been?
Oh my goodness. I mean, it's epic. Like, absolutely epic. I mean, how old were you when you did this?
29.
29. I mean, what? How could you go back to normal life after that 2.5 years of being away? Was that ever going to be a possibility? Or were you just completely, you got the travel bug by then? Or did you actually think, you know what, I think I might want to settle down now I've been through so many continents and spent so long on the road?
I've got to say that is a question that quite a lot of people ask me about. How do you settle down? At what point do you make the decision, I'm going to settle down? But there's also been other people who say, well, what sort of job do you have that you can go away so much? Because my travels have continued since then. And I always reply, well, I've actually made a career out of giving up jobs. So for me, my travels have always been the most important thing. And so I'll work and I'll save up money and then I'll take off initially just with a backpack. But then since getting my bike license, always on 2 wheels, I'll take off and go and explore the world, making money where I can along the way. But also I'm quite a frugal traveller. So I can make a small amount of money last quite a long time, partly through wild camping, but motorbikes traveling can be a very cheap way to travel as well. And so, yeah, it's my focus in life. I try and do work where I can have some flexibility to do these kind of travels. And that's what's important.
What jobs have you done? Or do you have like a career to fall back on? Or is it just anything and everything that you'll do when you're back in the UK?
Originally, I was a chef. I trained as a chef. I worked in hotels and restaurants for quite a number of years. And that's a great profession to travel with because there are always cooking jobs in different parts of the world. And I've worked in a lot of different countries. Latterly, I did my training to be a self-defense instructor in the late 90s. And I'm also a youth and community worker. And I specialize in working with children and teenagers from the most disadvantaged communities. I've been very lucky. I've been working with a charity for quite a while now that, although small, it really wants to be a good employer, and they give very flexible unpaid leave. When I'm in the UK, I work really hard and do lots of weekends and overnights and all that kind of thing. But I also get the option to take some unpaid leave to go off and carry on doing different bits and pieces of traveling. So I feel really lucky. I've had the best of both worlds. So, yeah, it depends on the job you're doing for what you can do with your life as a traveller. I know quite a lot of people who have IT-based jobs who can travel while they're on the road. But I'm a real home bird. People always find this odd. I love being at home. I love where I live. I've got family and friends around me. So although I really enjoy being away, I do always look forward to coming home as well, which I think is something to be really prized because it keeps me grounded. I'm very clear and certain about who I am and what my life is. But I do have this insatiable curiosity to see the world, and having a solid base enables me to do that.
Do you have an actual home?
I do actually have a home, yes. I live in a shared house. Yeah, so I've got a shared mortgage and it is on the windswept cliffs above Land's End.
Where haven't you been on a motorbike?
Where haven't I been? Oh, my goodness. Okay, there are always places that I do want to see. I should send you a picture of the map on the back of my top box. So I still have the same bike.
Is that the bike you use for all of your adventures still?
Yes. So Thelma, the BMW, still going strong. 223,000 miles on her now. And like I say, still going strong. I ride her every day. I use her for travels, but also with doing the freelance work, the companies always provide a motorbike. So if I'm in India, I'm provided with an Enfield. Other parts of the world, it's quite often either a Triumph or a BMW that I use. So I find that I'm quite happy riding whatever bike I'm put on. But yes, I still have Thelma. And on Thelma, so that first trip where we crossed Europe, Asia, Australia and Africa, well, then inevitably I had to head to the Americas. So I shipped Thelma over into North America and I rode from the very top of Alaska down to the southern tip of South America. So a trip that's known as the Trans Am, which is about 18,000 miles. I did a bit more than that because I was zigzagging around. And when I got down there, I'd met some Brazilians who said, you've got to go to Brazil. So I just thought, well, okay, I'm in South America. I might as well go to Brazil. So went up the east, having made it all the way down to the southernmost tip. I then went up the east coast of South America, up the length of Argentina, then inland, Paraguay, Brazil. I spent 3 months going around the coastline of Brazil and up the Amazon to Manaus in the jungle. And then there's a road northwards through the jungle up to Venezuela. Obviously, Venezuela was a little bit more stable than it is now. Rode across Venezuela, round Colombia. So I'd completed a whole loop of South America and then shipped Thelma home again.
So on your website, you've got the details of all your past adventures. So Epic to India and Beyond, Home Across Africa, In Search of Terra del Fuego, Timbuktu, Mongolian Mayhem, Looking for Labrador, The Trail to Tibet, Mapless in Madagascar, Borneo Biker. I mean, that's just an example of some of the trips that you've done on. What is it about riding on a motorbike that you love so much? Especially, for people who maybe haven't been on a bike before, or they've heard, oh, never go on a motorbike, it's too dangerous, or what, why would you want to do that? What is it that you love so much about exploring in this way?
Oh, that's such a good question about the why do you ride a motorbike? And yes, people do say, oh, being on two wheels is dangerous. But it's so interesting. Everyone who's ever ridden a motorbike just knows that it's an amazing experience. There's this sense of freedom. There's a real feel-good feeling about it, that I'm riding. Obviously, the wind is in my face. And then when I'm traveling, it's all the smells. So I said before about the eucalyptus, riding down the vanilla coast of Madagascar, where 80% of the world's vanilla is grown. And there literally is this strong, heady scent of vanilla in the air. Or other places in the world, there's jasmine. So all the smells. And also when you're going up through the mountains and suddenly the air on my face feels crisp and clear. And I think, I've now gone up quite an elevation. I must be at least 1,000 meters. And sure enough, when I stop and check what height I'm at, I have gone up. So that crispness, the immediacy of being on a motorbike, that you feel so much more of your surroundings. And also it's an instant icebreaker, pulling up on the bike into a small village. And it could be in northern India, it could be in Bolivia, it could be in Mozambique. And instantly I can be surrounded by people and they can be just talking to me. And it's a very different sensation from being in a vehicle with four wheels where there's a windscreen and windows and you're safe and encased. And for some people, they need that comfort zone around them. But for me, I welcome these interactions with people and they'll come rushing up and start asking me questions. And then when I take my helmet off and they're like, oh, Senora, if I'm in Latin America, because, wow, it's a woman on the motorbike. And then there's always an excited chatter amongst the people. Oh, it's a woman. And then they're looking around and they're like, well, where's your husband? Where's the man? Where's your husband? And I'm like, no, there's no husband. It's just me. And at first they never believe me. And then they eventually realize, well, yeah, there's no one else turning up. She is on her own. So the motorbike, it's that real feel of experiencing everything at first hand and being out there and being so approachable for people. I think that's what really helps. And like I was saying earlier about being able to follow any road or any footpath to get to where you want to go.
Do you ever get lonely on the bike? Like the constantly moving, new countries, new places, new food, new people, new interactions. there's a lot of change happening, especially when you're on your solo trips?
Well, there's a lot of solitude. I find, I don't know, sometimes you can be lonely even when you're surrounded by people, and English speaking people like at that. But I'm very comfortable in my own company. For me, it's an opportunity when I do come across English speakers that sometimes I start opening my mouth and I don't stop talking. I'm chat, 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 chat. And I can see people sort of thinking, am I ever going to get a word in edgeways with this woman? But then I do calm down. But the solitude, it's something that you learn to deal with. I think what helped was that my first motorbike trip, there were two of us. And we had our intercom. And we would talk aloud our thoughts. And we never stopped chatting the whole way. And these days, when I'm on my own, there's always an internal conversation going on and a reflection and singing songs. Oh, my goodness. I sing so many songs to myself when I'm on my bike. So it's times when there will be the odd occasion when I'm feeling lonely. But then that is so offset by the amazing experiences I have while I'm on the bike. And having said I travel a lot on my own, there are times when I've got other people with me. So initially, like I said, there was Becky and I both on the bike, and then Maggie. Other times there's been my mum's friends. Each of those, a couple of those have been on the back of the bike for trips. It's a nice combination. Sometimes there's someone else with me, or a lot of the time I am on my own. And I appreciate both those opportunities.
Tell me more about Borneo. So you ended up riding around the world's third largest island, exploring its jungles, coastline and unique cultures. What was that like?
Borneo was one of those places that I had been wanting to go to for so many years, but it's not on the way anywhere. And I realized one day, I just thought, right, I'm just going to have to bite the bullet. I will fly out there and I will rent a bike, because it was going to be really expensive to ship my bike all the way out there from the UK. So that's basically what I did. I got flights to Malaysia and then cheap flights across to Borneo itself. I rented a motorbike. It was a Honda 250, and then took off around the island. I didn't really know exactly what to expect. I like to go with an open mind to different countries. And oh my goodness, for me, it's the wildlife that really stood out. So the orangutan, the proboscis monkeys, the diving that I did, oh my goodness, some of the most spectacular diving off Sipadan Island, which is off the east coast of Borneo, and then riding through the jungles, all the bird life overhead, and crossing through the different borders as well, because Borneo is a huge island and it's got Malaysia, Indonesia and Brunei there. And I went to all three parts, although I would have loved to have spent more time in Indonesia. That's what I call the dark side, because it's so much less developed, and I'm going to go back there one day to explore it some more. I had a very long journey, sort of going all the way around Borneo, and it was just such fun. Again, I was doing wild camping, but also it's quite easy to find cheap accommodation and riding into villages and asking for somewhere to stay, eating the local food, traveling on boats, going up rivers. Lots of different amazing experiences.
What's been some of the most extreme situations that you've been in, whether that's because of people, weather, the landscape, the environment? I mean, I know you've got stories upon stories upon stories, but is there a moment, an extreme moment that stands out for any reason?
I think on my solo travels, a lot of people say, what happens if something goes wrong? And when I was riding in Patagonia, which is one of the least populated and most remote parts of the world, I was riding along the gravel, dealing with 120-mile gusts of wind, and I hit a rock that I was desperately trying to avoid, hit this rock, and the bike spun off and landed on its side, and I smashed a big hole in the side of the engine. And so when I say a big hole, about the size of my fist. And I was like, whoops, what am I going to do? Anyway, a pickup truck came along. By this point, I'd picked the bike up and I showed them the problem and I talked to them. And the guy, and like I say, it's very remote out here. The guy was heading north and I was heading south, but he offered to tow me. There was no space in the back of the truck for the bike. So he towed me. And he said about probably about 15 kilometres north of where I'd come off the bike. Oh, and by the way, physically I was fine. I do seem to bounce when I hit the ground. And so he offered to tow me. So he towed me, which was, oh my goodness, the ride from hell. It was a very short tow rope. And I learnt my lesson a lot with this, tied it onto the central bar at the back of the pickup truck. So I was getting dragged along through the central part of the track. And when you've got a lot of gravel, there tends to be weeds and small boulders, and all the debris piles up in the middle of the track that you're on while the wheels go in the ruts on either side. And I was getting dragged along through this central part over all these plants and undergrowth and boulders. Anyway, so I get dragged along. He was going very fast considering he was towing someone. So he towed me along to where he knew that there was a homestead and they have a phone there. So then we got there, we untied the bike, and he carried on northwards. I waved goodbye and I went and found the people in the homestead. However, their phone wasn't working and it had been out of action for a couple of weeks at this point. So I said, oh, sorry, we've got no phone. And there weren't really any mobile phones down in this part of the world, and certainly no signal. I said to them, and I can speak enough Spanish to get by. So I explained to them my situation. So I said, well, I'm going to leave my motorbike with you and I'm going to hitchhike south because that's the way to the nearest town. And it's 90 miles to the town. So I waved them goodbye, went back out to the road and hitchhiked. Well, I had to wait a while for something to come along. As I said, it's a very remote part of the world. And I hitchhiked a ride south for 90 miles, got to a town, and it was sort of getting up to evening time. So I found somewhere to stay, and then in the morning found a mechanic, explained to him what the problem was. And yeah, basically we arranged, there was another guy with a pickup truck. He and I went back north again, went and picked up Thelma. I said thank you to the people at the homestead, took Thelma back south again. And so basically that 90-mile stretch I crossed 3 times. And this mechanic was great. He managed to fix the hole in my engine. I couldn't believe it, to find someone with those skills and capabilities in such a remote part of the world. So he fixed the hole in the bike and zoom, I was off again. So sometimes things happen that are really tricky, because I know for most people that would be a nightmare scenario. Basically, my bike's completely dead and I'm in the middle of nowhere. But you've got to be able to trust yourself and know that you can get yourself out of situations. And quite often it's that judgment of people, knowing who you can trust, and quite often making these snap decisions about, yeah, this is a good guy. I'm going to climb in this truck and get a lift with him. And my judgment has never let me down yet.
Do you ever get stressed?
I'm usually pretty good and tolerant and patient, but sometimes I'm not so good at waiting. And when that waiting can be combined with people being downright sexist because I'm a woman and they perceive women as being lesser beings to themselves, then I can feel a bit wound up. So I just have to give myself a strong talking to. But sometimes I do let off steam and I do get annoyed about stuff. But then I just know I'm a complete alien in a lot of people's worlds, that they've never seen a woman do so many things on her own. And they've certainly never seen a woman on a motorbike at all, let alone such a big motorbike.
There's something called Ride with Tiffany. Do you want to share a little bit more about that?
So having crossed all the continents, some of them 2 times, 3 times, I was approached by one of the large tour companies and I was asked to lead a group. And so the first tour that I led was from the UK all the way to Beijing in China via Tibet and Everest Base Camp. And what a thrill it was. I led a group of 12 riders all the way across Europe and Asia. And it was fantastic. It's all in a pre-planned itinerary because it needs to be when you're leading a group. So staying in hotels, but experiencing the same roads and conditions that I do when I'm on my own. And the thrill of reaching the Himalayas and riding up and up and up, reaching Everest Base Camp and looking across at the highest point on our planet. It was a massive feeling of achievement that, wow, we've done this, and then continuing on and reaching Beijing and shipping the bikes home from there. So I then started doing more travels for other companies as well. And now a large chunk of my time is spent being a freelance tour guide. And so I can lead groups of riders or individuals, I can also advise on where to go, how to get there, anywhere in the world, because I seem to have ridden pretty much everywhere that people go.
You haven't written a book, have you? Or have you?
Oh, Sarah, I get asked that question so much about writing a book. I have a vague manuscript sitting in my cupboard at home. And every so often I say to myself, oh, I must go and finish that. And I just then seem to find myself off on another adventure, whether it's going to Kyrgyzstan or Uganda. One day I will sit and finish that book. But you know what, with all the travels I've done, I think it would actually be about 12 books probably.
Probably, I think absolutely. Like, I feel as though we haven't even scratched the surface on what you've done and what you've achieved. Where's the best place for people to find out more information about those trips and to follow along with your future journeys?
The best place to find out more about my journeys is on my website, tiffanystravels.co.uk. I'm also on Facebook. So yeah, Facebook and my website is probably the best way. And also I give quite a few talks each year about my travels at different events. So for example, we've got the upcoming WRWR, which maybe you've heard of, I don't know. It's the Women Riders World Relay, which has been a baton that's gone around the world being carried by female motorcyclists. And there's been tens of thousands of women involved as it crossed every continent. And it's due to come back into the UK in February. And then we're going to have a grand finale in London. And I'm one of the headline speakers for that, which is very exciting. And I teach, well, as I said initially, I am a self-defense instructor. I specialize in teaching it to women in particular, and especially travel safe. So how to travel safely, whether you're on your own or with others, but going overseas and having the confidence to deal with different situations that you may find frightening and being able to come out of these successfully.
I'll make sure that I put all of the links to everything that you've talked about in the show notes so that people can find links to the events and Ride with Tiffany and the different past adventures that you've had. But I'd love for you just to final words, just to share some final words of wisdom or top tips and advice for other women who are thinking, God, I wish I could do what Tiffany's done. Like, you know, what have you learned from all your travels that you'd like to share?
One thing I've learned from all my travels is the most important thing you can do in life is to believe in yourself. And if you've got a dream to do something, then go for it. Reach out, do whatever you can to achieve that dream. Because if we listen to all the naysayers in our lives and the people who say, oh, that's too dangerous, or, oh, you can't do it, we'll never get anywhere in life. We are all capable of achieving our dreams. And if you've got an idea, give it a go.
100%. If you've got an idea, give it a go. Absolutely agree. Tiffany, thank you so much for coming on the Tough Girl podcast to share more about your incredible life and your different travel adventures on your motorcycle. Absolutely inspiring. Can't wait to follow along with all of your future travels and adventures. But thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Hey tribe, I hope you enjoyed that episode with Tiffany. What an absolute legend. Now, if you are interested in other motorcycle journeys from incredible women, then I've got a couple of podcast recommendations for you. So on May 30th in 2017, we spoke to Elspeth Beard, who at age 22 in 1982 set off on a solo motorbike trip around the world. It ended up taking 2.5 years, and she covered a distance of 48,000 miles, taking in sites such as North America, Australasia, Asia, and Europe. And this was all done in the age before mobile phones and the internet. Elspeth shares more about riding through post-revolutionary Iran during the war with Iraq. She survived life-threatening illnesses and numerous accidents. She witnessed civil uprising that delayed her journey and forced her to fake documents to cross borders. It is one hell of a story not to be missed. So well worth checking that out. Also take a listen, we spoke with Jenny Tinmouth a Honda racing rider who was the 2016 British Superbike Championships. She's a female lap record holder at the Isle of Man TT and a 2 times Guinness World Record holder. So it's a really, really interesting episode. Jenny is super down to earth, very humble, and it was fantastic to learn more about her career and how she got to where she's going. She shares more about, what it was like growing up, leaving school at 18, how she got her motorcycle license, the skills needed to be a good rider, and her advice for girls who want to get involved in motorcycle racing. It came out on March 8, 2016. We've also spoken with Lois Price, who's a British travel writer. In 2003, Lois decided that she'd had enough of working at the BBC and she decided to leave it all behind and take a trip on her motorcycle. She headed to Alaska and started the 20,000-mile journey down to the southernmost tip of South America. And that's just the start of many, many sort of epic adventures that she's had. During the podcast, Lois shares more about the reasons behind the decisions that she'd made, the highs and the lows, dealing with fear, your own fears and others, what it was like crossing the border from California into Mexico, what she learnt about herself while traveling. She also talks on taking on Africa, the greatest motorcycle challenge in the world, and shares more about why she decided to also take her motorcycle over to Iran. She also gives top tips for women who want to go traveling or go on an adventure. So those are my top 3 recommendations if you're interested in motorcycle riding. Even if you're not interested in motorcycle riding, it's still really, really fascinating stories. So Elizabeth Bird, Jenny Tinmouth and Lois Price. All of our previous episodes are available at toughgirlchallenges.com, so please do go and visit the website. If you are brand new to Tough Girl Challenges and the Tough Girl podcast, please do go and visit toughgirlchallenges.com, spend a bit of time, have a look through the different blog articles that there are, the podcast episodes. You can also find out more about some of the different challenges that I've done, from the Overland Track, the Lycian Way, the Camino Portuguese, the Pacific Coast Highway, Appalachian Trail, Marathon des Sables. More information about supporting the Tough Girl podcast by becoming a patron. There's links to Patreon, Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl podcast. Super easy to support the mission and help to pay it forward so that other women around the world can be motivated and inspired. But wherever you are, whatever you're doing, have an awesome day. Just give it your all, give it 110%, get after it. Focus on all of the reasons why you can do something and not the reasons why you can't. All right, lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.